Chapter 31. My sister Adele was due to get married at the end of May, and I was going to be a bridesmaid. Back home in Africa, the grandparents of her fiancé arranged to give our grandparents 16 cows in exchange for Adele's hand in marriage, per tradition. Adele and her fiancé were planning to travel to Rwanda and hold the wedding there, just like Princess. I was excited about going back to Africa. My parents and siblings would be there too, of course, and I knew it meant the time had come to re-establish ties. Rocco drove me home to Rochester in early May. It was a long, somber drive. I was not looking forward to this visit, and my heart felt heavy. "It's time to make peace," Rocco told me. "You'll feel so much better once you do." I walked up to my front door while he drove away. As soon as he left, I felt a pang. I missed him already. I walked in the house and Mom and I just looked at each other, not speaking. I hated seeing her so upset with me, but I was annoyed with her too. Dad wasn't there, as he had already gone to Rwanda to help Adele prepare for the wedding. In the house, the air was thick with tension. Mom and I didn't speak to each other for days. My parents lived in a suburban home on the outskirts of Rochester now. A cozy 2-story house with a long dining room table, like the one back home in Africa. A big soft maroon couch to sink into, and a large screen TV for our beloved soccer games. Framed photos from our time in America lie in the living room, since the photos from our past in Africa had burned in the camp. On the top shelf of the tall cabinet, Mom kept a jug made from a hollowed-out gourd, much like the ones she used back in the mountains of South Kivu. More people from our tribe had been relocated now, some in Rochester. Friends and relatives came and went all day long in this home, unannounced, just like our home in Congo. Mom had begun working in a nursing home, and Dad, as always, did everything he could to support her. He had never been physically able to return to work after being hit by the van, although he did get some disability support. I know it pained him greatly to see my mom working when he could not. Life had taken so much from him, but never his spirit. He had lived his life with such courage and grace, as had my mom. Being home reminded me of this. After several awkward days, one of my uncles, Mutkware, came over to help my mom and me talk it all out. Mutkware is the generous man who had taken in my shattered family in Burundi after the massacre. He and his family had resettled in America a few years after us. For my mom and me, he became a mediator. "I'm going to let one of you express your feelings, and then the other," he said. It was profoundly uncomfortable for Mom and me to sit down together. There was a tsunami of emotion on both ends. I knew I hadn't explained my feelings when I had fled from college, but I didn't know how to tell her about the flashbacks and my failing grades. I just didn't think she would understand. She had always been so tenacious, no matter what life threw at her. And in my culture, it was highly unusual for parents and children to discuss their feelings, or for anyone to talk about their feelings at all. People didn't express their pain in this way. If people were having problems, they might say to pray for them and leave it at that. Meanwhile, my mom had made assumptions about me and my life, and that had hurt me, pushing me away. We had never been further apart. It was also the first time I had rebelled against my parents. It was the only time I really stood up to them, and it hurt them, even though that had not been my intention. I never wanted to disobey them or cause them distress. My mom spoke first. She listed all the ways I had messed up, starting with the way I had left school and had barely kept in touch. "How could you do that to me?" she asked. "How could you just go? If you were doing poorly in school, whatever was going on, you didn't feel like you could come to your mother and talk about it? Everyone goes through things. You don't run away." It went on for a long time. And then it was my turn. I said, "Mom, I'm not trying to hurt you." And I finally told her everything. I told her about the flashbacks. I explained how I struggled with the fact that I had survived the massacre and Deborah had not. I said that sometimes I blamed myself for her death, and I felt that my parents blamed me for her death. I told her how it disturbed me when she referred to me as the youngest in the family, as if Deborah had not existed. And I told her it bothered me how none of us ever talked about Deborah. The truth came tumbling out. I said things I had never said to her before. I wasn't expecting Mom to understand or agree with everything I said, but I was determined to tell her. I needed to stand my ground, to be myself, whether my parents could relate to where I was coming from or not. My time in Brooklyn had become a defining moment for me. I was becoming my own person, a different person from the one my parents had expected me to be. But at the same time, my parents were the ones who had instilled the confidence in me to be myself. I pointed this out to my mom. I also told her that I knew American culture terrified her because she was not familiar with it. She had not grown up with it. I told her that I understood this. Everything will be okay, I assured her. I would never abandon my principles or ideals. I explained that I was learning to see the world through a broader lens. I just want to live my life, I said. My mom listened. We had never spoken so intimately. When are you going back to college? She asked. Education meant so much to her, and she didn't want me to blow up the opportunities that she had worked hard to provide for me. She and my dad had made so many sacrifices for their children. I understood that. I told her I was looking into different schools, including one in New York City called Mercy College. She wanted me to go back to Houghton College, which was much closer to Rochester. She didn't like the idea of my living in the city, but I had fallen in love with the city, its creative energy, its mix of diverse cultures. I was liberated there, surrounded by people from all over the planet. There's a certain sense of camaraderie in the city, a feeling that we're all in it together, no matter how different we might be. Mom also asked about Rocco, as I knew she would. I told her he's a great guy, a caring and supportive soul who had spurred me to reunite with my family. I explained how I had met him and assured her that I was not living with him, as she had assumed. She shook her head and said, "You are not going to marry him." "Mom, I'm not getting married." "Then what are you doing?" she asked. Dating was not part of her life experience. "Mom," I implored, "I don't think it's fair for you to expect me to live within these cultural expectations. I'm not trying to spite you, but we live in America now. I don't want to live my life based on where I came from. I don't want to be defined by a race, a culture, a tribe." I explained that I deeply love and respect my tribe and my culture. I told her, if I marry someone from my culture, that would be awesome. But if I marry someone from outside my culture, that would be awesome too. She stared at me intently. She could see that I was not going to budge. Even if we did not agree with each other on that day, we began to get to know each other on a new level. We knew we had only just begun talking.